before the ceasefire broke down. It's dated November 3rd. And they said, the U.S. representative said, Israeli officials told us on multiple occasions that they intend to put the Gaza economy on the brink of collapse. How do you reconcile that statement with Israel's agreement to end the siege of Gaza? Well, I think that's a legitimate question which a rational person asks him or herself. Or did they not have an obligation to lift that siege? Now, when Mary Robinson, the former High Commissioner for Human Rights, says a whole civilization has been destroyed, I'm not exaggerating. Israel has the right to maintain the siege, even when the ceasefire is being respected. Does that sound right to you?
What about in 2008 when Iran tried to actually bring an entire ship, an entire cargo of weapons into Gaza? Doesn't it seem normal that you only want to prevent the death of your own citizens?
Let me be clear about something. Let me be clear. Because I don't like to be a hypocrite, and I don't try to be politically correct. I said to you, and I carefully researched the question, the international law is neutral. It's neutral on the right of people struggling for self-determination to use armed force. Now, if they have the right, or the law is neutral, then they also have the right to receive weapons. And I, for one, personally, would not oppose if Iran sent weapons to Gaza. The people of Gaza, yes, I know it may shock you. I know it may shock you. But the people of Gaza have the right to be free. And like everybody else, they have the right to use weapons. That's a right. Or at least the law is neutral on that question. But let's set that aside. And I ask you again, you know GISHA, G-I-S-H-A, the Israeli organization responsible for freedom of movement, the human rights organization. They put out periodic statements, maybe once a month, sometimes it feels like twice a day, listing the products that are denied entry into Gaza. Now I ask you, you brought up this Iranian ship, which allegedly X, Y, and Z. Personally, I don't believe it, but I know it's not important. How does that explain why, as John Kerry said at the time, the senator, you may recall, he went to the border and he said, what do you mean? You're not allowing in pasta? Why were they not allowing in pasta? Why were they not allowing in crayons? Why were they not allowing in children's books? Why were they not allowing in paper? Now I ask you, they say we can't allow in construction material, we can't allow in cement because Gaza may use it for tunnels. Israel destroyed, or nearly destroyed, both destroyed and nearly destroyed, I'm combining categories, 6,300 homes in Gaza. Left thousands of people homeless. They have no right to a roof over their head. They have no right to rebuild. They have to live in tents from now through eternity. Does that sound right to you? I just don't understand it. I really don't. I don't know why people use labels like pro-Israel. That's just pro-insanity. It's not pro-Israel. It's not. And I can't understand how reasonable, rational people who have been trained in the social sciences, who've been trained to reason, and should have a moral sense, how they can possibly defend these things. They are just so immoral. Pick up any of the human rights publications. I mean, they rip my innards. I mean that. You know, sometimes I'm sick of this whole thing. I just wish it would end because I'm sick of it. And then I open up one of these publications and I read what they're doing. It was called Separate and Unequal. Anyone read it? You should read it. It's about what Israel does in what's called Area C of the West Bank, 60% of the West Bank. It describes how they don't let people build homes, they don't let people do anything there. It describes how a man, he built a home. Israel demolished it. He built it again, they demolished it again. Built it a third time, they demolished it again. Built it a fourth time, they demolished it again. They described another man. He built a home. His 4 sons built homes around him because, Arabs, Muslims are crazy. Well, families like to stay together. So he built a home. 4 homes. And his children, 1 son, 2 sons, 3 sons, 4 sons. They built homes around him. Israel went in and demolished all the homes. They talk about how in the Jordan Valley, there are 6,000 to 9,000 settlers in the Jordan Valley. Those 6,000 to 9,000 settlers have more water than 1/4 of the 2.5 million people living in the West Bank. They have a higher water allocation than the total 1/4 of the 2.5 million people living in the West Bank. Does that sound fair?
No.
Does that sound reasonable?
No.
I can't understand why people can't see that. Does it sound right to you when a man says he went into Gaza and it was like a child with a magnifying glass burning ants? Does that sound right? I don't get it. I really don't. It has nothing to do with the pro-Israel or pro-Arab or pro-Muslim. I have no pro-Arab, pro-Muslim, pro-Arab, no one can grasp those concepts. It just has to do with having a heart. Having a heart. And to see it's just wrong. And we should do what we can to end it and not prolong it with all these lies and excuses.
Yeah.
All right.
That's
Okay. Just the last thing. With Richard Goldstone. I really think it's so, it's so unsavory. Richard Goldstone, he says I'm a Zionist. He says I love Israel. He says my mother was an activist in the Zionist women's movement. My daughter did Aliyah to Israel. She did Zionist emigration to Israel. He sat in the board of directors of the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. He worked for Israel his entire adult life. And yet, to his everlasting credit, his eternal credit, when he went to Gaza, despite all of his emotional ties with Israel, despite all of his familial connections with Israel, despite all the ties of kith and kin, when he saw what was done to Gaza, he could not so be derelict in his professional responsibility that he could deny what all of his judgment and all of his evidence, all the evidence told him. As the report said at the end, that Israel used deliberately disproportionate force to punish, humiliate, and terrorize a civilian population. And when Mr. Goldstone showed the character to overcome all of those ties of kith and kin, all of those emotional resonances that Israel had for him. And he said, legally, or morally, and legally, what Israel did was wrong. All the stoppers were pulled to destroy the man. He was called an anti-Semite. Michael Oren, the so-called